Your Creative Push, episode 263.
There's something that happens when you're pushing towards what you feel you are meant to be doing.
You have to trust your process, and you have to have faith that you're making the right decision.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guests today are Justin Hopkins and Yoshino, the founders of the No Wave Collective. Now, you might remember Justin. He was on the show before for an awesome episode. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page today. But Yoshino joins him to talk about not only his podcast, Artist Decoded, a great podcast that you should also check out if you enjoy this show, but also his photography and then how he and Justin came together to start the No Wave Collective. And in that respect, they also dive deep into the idea of finding and grabbing on to people that have similar mindsets, similar goals, and similar creative ways of thinking, and just latching onto them, not letting them go, treating that as love at first sight kind of, and just making sure that you nurture that relationship and see what you can come up with, see what you can collaborate on or collectively create into the universe. And that is one of the goals of the No Wave Collective, of finding your tribe, or if you can't find your tribe, of starting your own. They also talk about the idea of starting a big project like No Wave and how they're able to balance their own personal work while taking on this gargantuan task. They also talk about trying to find a way to maintain creative honesty and also being adaptable and not becoming a caricature of yourself by doing the same thing over and over again in this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. Just a really fun conversation that all three of us were really able to dive deep into this whole creative existence. I had a wonderful time talking with the two of them, and I know that you are going to enjoy my conversation with both Yoshino and Justin Hopkins. Enjoy. Justin, Yoshino, welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Thanks for having us.
No, it's a pleasure. We talked with Justin a while ago. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page. But Yoshino, it's a pleasure to meet you and have you on the show. So welcome, man.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you as well.
So I was wondering if you could actually start out by telling us a little bit about yourself, about your amazing podcast that I think a lot of the people listening to this podcast would really jive with. And so sort of your creative upbringing, I guess, and then what encouraged you to start that podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I started shooting when I was 20. I'm 31 now. And I actually started going to school as a business major at Cal State Long Beach over in California. And, during that process, I was just kind of like figuring out what I wanted to do. And, I think I just went to school for business because I mean, it's kind of like that system that you go through. You go through to elementary school, and then you go to middle school and high school, and then obviously you would have to go to college. And that was kind of like my mindset during that time. So I guess through that process, I don't know. I started shooting, and then I just kind of like found like a creative practice through that. And then, during that time I was shooting like commercial jobs, and I was shooting for like different companies and stuff and shooting commercially. I just kind of felt like I wasn't shooting something that was authentic to that artistic vision that I was starting to accumulate through just looking at different images and researching different artists and looking at different films. And then I kind of found myself at a rut at one point, maybe about 3 years ago. And then I started really like diving in and figuring out like what I liked and why I liked those things. And then I started Artist Decoded, which is my podcast, where I actually met Justin on the podcast. He was episode number 7 with our mutual friend now, Daniel Seagrove. Yeah, and I guess that's just where, the journey began, part of the journey at least.
Right. Well, when Justin was on the show, he, I think, had a similar story with how illustration was like something that was like kind of close to what he wanted to do, because it's like, using the same muscles to, draw stuff, but it didn't really like connect with that like true passion. And I think everybody has that, where it takes this like kind of deep dive to figure out exactly what it is that you care about. And like, then you can put that out into the world once you kind of figure out that thesis. Justin, do you agree with that?
I mean, I can only speak personally, but that's definitely how it worked for me. There's just like this kind of persistent dissatisfaction you have when you're so close to something, but so far away from actually achieving the thing you set out to do when you were a kid. You know, you have this kind of visual picture in your mind of what you want to do, and then when you get there, you realize all you're doing is facilitating someone else's vision, and you're just a set of hands, and that's extremely like lacking in any kind of real fulfillment. So like, and then you figure out, oh, I got now I need to. Now that I've built the skills, now I need to fulfill the other aspect of me that's wanting. So then you just figure out how to do that. And for me, it was fine art. And for Yoshino, I guess it was more artistic, fine art, photography, and the podcast, way of like continuously learning and being curious, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, during that time period when I was first shooting, and maybe about the first 4 years of shooting, and I was shooting... A lot of it was surrounded around fashion. I think it was because of the aesthetic of fashion that I found really interesting, like the lighting and the subjects and stuff like that. But then the more that I dived into that, I just found that it was kind of like a one-dimensional approach to just looking at art in general. Because essentially what you're doing is you're photographing things for commerce, and you're photographing it in a way that's contrived. So similar to Justin, I think I wanted to say something more with my artwork, and it wasn't so much, wasn't so inundated anymore by like technical things. I was more so attracted to things that were more, I guess, you know, some things that had something to say further than just the way that it looked.
Mm-hmm. It's like we're just kind of illustrating the slow disenchantment of the creative industry, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, then how do you get re-enchanted then? Like, how do you know when you're back on the right path?
You just feel like things just start opening up. Like, for instance, like when I first started going back into fine art again, you started meeting the right people and there was just something there was some new curiosity that kept on coming up. The problem when I was illustrating, there was no curiosity left. I just did the job to get through it. You know, there was nothing there that I wanted to find anymore. And then when you're on the right path, certain new things just keep on coming up. Like when I met Yoshino for the Artist Decoded podcast, we really hit it off, and we developed a friendship and realized we had similar philosophies. And then it kind of grew from there. And that's just one example of things kind of opening themselves up to you when you're on the right path. I think it's kind of a natural thing.
Yeah, I knew when I met Justin, I was like, yeah, that's the time when it really opened up for me. It was just something about him and his charisma.
the instant bromance.
Yeah, it was just a bromance.
Yeah, just have that animal magnetism. You know?
Yeah. you know that scene in the movie when the crowd parts and then they just float towards each other. It's kind of like that.
No, it wasn't.
Oh my God. Oh, the slow-mo scene.
Exactly.
No, we're joking around, but I think you're onto something, and I think you're right. I think when you can connect with somebody and it just snaps, where you're like, all right, this person, like, I don't even have to like explain myself. This person already gets it, like, and I already know this from just speaking a few sentences to them. And I think those are the kinds of people that they come rarely, but like you kind of have to grab onto that person. Well, not physically, but you have to like try to stay connected with that person and figure out how to, especially for creative people, how to collaborate with that person. Which is what you guys are doing now, right?
Or just opportunities just naturally come up. That's what more or less happened with Yoshino and I. It's like we started like this whole thing with just the conversation we had, and we realized that Low and Artist Decoded had these overlaps. Like Low is the collective that I started with Emilio Villalba and Daniel Seagrove. That was the first iteration of this thing. And then Yoshino was doing his podcasting, reaching this wider community and kind of developing a community around it. So there was just this overlap of the things we were trying to do. And then it just more and more of these shows or opportunities, business opportunities presented themselves to where we could just jump in together because we had the knowledge of each other's shared philosophies. It wasn't even like we tried to. It just things started happening, which was validating, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, I have it's not really a theory that I wrote down or anything, but, you know, the more that I started doing the podcast, the more that I this word tribe came to mind. And even from like the listeners of the podcast, it would come back to me and talk to me about, kind of like the philosophies of creating a collective and things like that. The more so that that we like found out this like sort of like tribal experience, and then which brought us to No Wave, which is, I guess, the next iteration of that, of bringing essentially the tribe together.
Right. Now, would you say that in hindsight, like you both had your things that you were doing, like you dipping your toes into different things or starting new things like Low Collective or the podcast Artist Decoded, and now that you've started this No Wave, would you say that it feels like the other things that you've started were kind of leading up to this, whereas you thought those other things were like the thing, you realize now that it was just kind of a step to this other thing?
That's an interesting question. I feel like more than anything, those are still building blocks that are at the cornerstone of No Wave, because they've essentially been absorbed into, but still have their own identities. Like Artist Decoded still exists as it existed before, but now it's just it's like also in this family that is No Wave, and Low is in the No Wave family as well. So they actually are just continuing. It's just like this big umbrella network. It's just No Wave is a way of like looking at these things connections, looking at these things as connections, versus like just disparate things happening in parallel to each other. So it's more or less that it's not that those things are gone or lesser than or anything. They're just part of the overall structure, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It's like you have different little progress bars for each kind of imaginary thing that you want to create in your life. This goes for anybody, and it's just like a matter of when you start each one. Like you could start one at one point in your life and realize that in order to kind of like to start the other one, you have to like reach a certain level on another. I'm not making sense, but
no,
you have to like reach a certain level in one thing to kind of open up that new level, that bonus level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they're like necessary discoveries in order to figure out the things you didn't know kind of thing. And No Wave is the thing we didn't know.
Yeah.
Well, explain No Wave then, since we've been talking about it already. Explain to the listeners like what No Wave is.
Sure. No Wave in its essence is like an artist collective that kind of operates as both a kind of commercial agency for the artist, as well as a gallery showroom. And it's just it's this way we figured out to kind of take back our creative freedom for the artists within the collective. Like we have our own gallery space, and so we don't have to worry about gallerists. We have our own art dealers that sells the art that we give them, so we don't have to worry about like the gatekeepers. We're the gatekeepers now. And now we use the leverage of all this creative talent to be picked up by like talent companies and all that and they look for like bigger clients for us because we are all still like craftsmen in the industry still. So it just helps us figure out more ways to facilitate these larger shows in this big space in downtown LA that we're really lucky to have. So it's like we can give a platform for these artists to have like solo shows while also figuring out alternative ways to fund the shows versus just leaning so heavily on the gallerists who oftentimes try to like force you to make more art that's for more economic choices so they can sell it. You know what I mean? They have different incentives. We're like just putting this incentives more stacked towards the artists. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, you're the new gatekeepers, but you're kind of giving the key to everybody.
Well, everybody in the collective, the idea is like this is like a test. It's like a prototype kind of. We're evolving as we go. When we first started, we started out as just we somehow got this opportunity to have this large gallery space and just to do whatever we wanted with it. And so we decided to, with the Low Collective and Artist Decoded in mind, create this community. And it turns out that everybody in this community were fine artists, but also they did illustration, they did photography, they directed film, and all these things, So it was a way of like getting everybody's resources together, and then that in itself is like a marketable tool. People want to be attached to this thing. So it's just like we just realized it's better together versus competing against each other. and we have our own gallery space to express all the ideas that we have without worrying about economic overhead as much, which is what I think is a good recipe for innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can take the money thing out of it, things like really open up.
Yeah, or it's not even taking the money out of it. It's just like getting different ways of channeling money towards us without it being purely the old gallery system. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the ideas that are floating through? Like, what are some of the kind of themes that you have going on there?
At first, we were just kind of trying to figure it out, and it's been an evolutionary process throughout the entire process of creating No Wave. So we were able to experiment with a lot of different types of nights, things that felt like were pretty natural, to do at the time. And, we're still growing it and trying to figure out innovative ways to like collaborate with different companies and, collaborating with production companies and galleries and things like that. A lot of these themes that we're going to be having in 2018, 2019, we're working with the artists to come up with different gallery shows or to come up with screenings and these things that really come from the reason why we're doing it, but also it comes from just my interests and Justin's interests.
Yeah, a big part of it too is like just being like No Wave as a whole is like trying to be an approachable, unpretentious access point for all like economic levels and all levels of like artistic sophistication to come to these things. Like we'll have like free screenings with like the filmmakers. We'll have these kind of wellness summits where we have speakers speaking. We'll have the traditional art shows, and at all the art shows we also have like a premiere of like a composer's new work while that's happening. So we're trying to cross-pollinate all these different worlds. There's ticket events, and then there's free events. There's like workshops. There's all these different ways to kind of activate different parts of the artistic community. It allows people to come to us, and even if they don't have even if they can't be like an art buyer coming into a gallery to buy like $10,000 worth of art or something, there's something else for them, and they can get the same amount of quality and care that goes with that, but they don't have to be pressured into buying it. It's not the same kind of feeling, and I think that's really important. There should be more places like that where you can approach not just like local artists, and there's nothing wrong with that, but also like professional artists who are like seasoned and they're there for you to interact with. I think that's an important thing. It's kind of like breaking down that like myth of the unapproachable brooding artist,
Right, absolutely. And also, I think the best thing about it is that whole cross-pollination where you guys seem very open to lots of different art forms. And then when you kind of provide this place for them to all come like openly, then you can have those like those magical moments like you two had, like where you can find your tribe, you can make those connections with other people, and then like who knows what will come of that,
Yeah, well, that's the idea. We're just hoping we're gonna get close to that. So that's the philosophy anyway.
And what does No Wave mean?
Okay, so No Wave was a name we came up with when we first started. To back up a bit, when we first started No Wave, we started it in a gallery in Little Tokyo. We're two Americans of Japanese ancestry in a gallery that's in the last Japanese American owned building on all of Little Tokyo in downtown Los Angeles.
Oh wow!
So when we were researching like everything, we were right on the edge of the Arts District, right on the edge of Little Tokyo, right on the edge of Skid Row even. So there's all this weird this nexus point for all this different culture coming in. So like NOH is like reminiscent of it's referencing the old Japanese theater. It's a kind of like traditional theater in Japan. No means talent or skill. And then No Wave is like a art movement back from the 60s and 70s. It's a film movement. It's an art movement. It's a division of like punk rock music. It's a way of like branching away at the time. And then No Wave comes from the Claude Chabrol quote. There's no new waves, only the ocean. As in, there's nothing new that comes in. It's all just like the collective unconscious. It's all like innovations built on innovations, and it's a big collaborative effort with everybody that's actually involved and everything that's influenced them. So it's like referencing like three different things, and it just seemed to be a really tight way of like delivering that story.
Deep. I like it.
Yeah, it's a good long explanation, but it's sprinkled with many meaning.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it has much more significance to me now. I love that. Well, you're both showing work there, right? And I think, Justin, you even were playing music at some of the stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, we're very much part of the collectives, even though we technically are leading it right now. I mean, we see ourselves as just like artists, like anybody else. So I played music for one of the events. Some other people in the collective will play music at the events as well. And, Yoshino plays, or Yoshino photographs it, and we're all kind of like helping each other out. Yeah.
We're just using all of our skill sets to better the collective and figuring out ways that we can all naturally and organically collaborate within, whether, just trying to use our skill sets to the best possible degree.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, now, because I know this is like a huge undertaking and it probably takes up like a ton of your time to like plan all this and just figure all of this out and coordinate it all. So how has this kind of affected your own personal work, both with Yoshino with your photography and Justin with your art?
Yeah, I mean, well, with my photography, there was a point where I was kind of going through a rut with my photography, and it was mostly about not trusting myself on what exactly I wanted my work to speak about. So, once I got over that, and then we started going into No Wave, I mean, it was partially because of the podcast and No Wave, but it kind of allowed me to be able to do more personal work instead of doing more commercialized work. So, because of No Wave as well, there's a certain, and we're investing so much time, and it's pretty much become like our full-time gigs, aside from our personal work, but we're still, pursuing that work. And it's actually made me realize the potential of my own personal work, fuller.
Yeah, I feel like there's like, the thing about it is like No Wave in itself is an art project for us, it's just as exciting as any art projects. The stakes are much higher. But this is us like expressing this thing that I think needs to be expressed, and it's kind of a rare opportunity we have to express it. I've found that Yoshino has actually been shooting more since I've known him in No Wave. I think, and I've been producing work that I find to be a lot better. We just part of it is because it's so important to us. It's not like a job that's draining to me in the same way other jobs are. It's right. So I find it inspiring, and it just makes you manage your time better. Like Yoshino and I always like say like, oh, do we need a day to do this? He asked me if I need a day to paint. We're very aware of each other's like mental health in that way too, because we need to do that. So like we are forced to be better at time management is all that is.
Plus also, I mean, it's not like we're trying to figure out ways to be business partners. Like throughout this process, Justin and I have become like really good friends. And so, also with like the mental health thing, being able to be aware and to understand like the sensitivities of like, the emotional sensitivities of like what each other's going through and stuff like that. And I feel, I mean, it's been just a great, partnership, and it's actually made me a lot more effective in terms of business and having more of a focus, but it also, goes under the same ethos. I mean, I think the thing that's important about Justin and my collaboration is that we have the same ethos, or a very similar ethos into why we're doing this project,
Right. Like we were talking about before, it's just that like instinct when you know that you're on the same page as somebody else, and then you can kind of further explore that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yoshino, you mentioned that this helped you to kind of realize the potential of your work. I was wondering, do you understand why that is? Like, why is it like seeing other people see your work, or is it just like being able to do more of it? Like, how has that kind of helped you to realize that potential?
Well, I mean, I think it's helped me realize that I have a lot more to say. I mean, and I mean, I think I've realized that when I started the podcast, and then I was going in, and now we're on episode 81. So it's, it's quite a lot of episodes now, and I've talked to quite a lot of people and been able to like dissect my own personal process throughout that process. So I think it really just comes from a comfortability standpoint and really understanding and maturing, understanding myself as a person, first of all, and as an artist. And then, the more that I am comfortable with what I have to say, the more that I have been outputting things that I feel are more relevant to the way that I view things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's I can understand. For me, that's what it's like with writing. It's like when I can actively do that and write what I think about the world, that's how I figure out what I think about the world. And like the more that you can do that, like the more that I can get to that, like the more not necessarily confident I get, but like you said, it's like the more I realize like that what I'm saying is actually valid or important or matters, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Justin, how about you? Have you found that your work has kind of changed since you started the collective?
Absolutely. Well, I think a really important part to state is that this whole thing is us kind of essentially collecting our favorite artists. Like there's some of my heroes in this. There's my favorite artists and my peers. All the people that essentially we wanted to work with in some capacity are in here. So they're all. Like there's like friendly competition in the sense that like if you show with these people, you want to not look like you don't want to drop the ball in a show with your favorite artists or your heroes who are part of this thing. There's like this accountability that comes with that too. So there's higher stakes for the work, just subconsciously. Even if you're not trying to do that, they're just there, and it kind of pushes everybody to go forward. At least that's what I feel.
Right. It's that whole thing about surrounding yourself with people that are kind of driven, people that are wanting the same thing out of life. And when you surround yourself with those people instead of the people that are negative and just want to be lazy and not do anything and just watch TV all day, it's a different universe that you're creating for yourself.
Yeah. Not only that. Oh, sorry. Not only that, but it's like the part of at least the Low Collective was like me and Emilian Seagrove started that when we were kind of we realized that being a visual artist is kind of a lonely existence, and we were kind of jealous of musicians. And I used to be a musician, and I really missed that communal aspect that was inherent in the process. And when you just paint, you just sit in your room all day and just work by yourself, and there's not that same thing. You just go in a hole, and then you come out of the hole for a little bit to show the work, and then go right back in. It's like not that social aspect where you can actually really, it's not baked into the whole process, and I think that's what we're trying to do a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, if there's that saying that iron sharpens iron as man sharpens man, and yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a gravitational thing, like, because, and it might be furthered because of social media and the instant access that you get to people, but somehow people begin to like find each other. I mean, unless you're a complete recluse, but then there's that.
I think that's like us finding each other on social media is the direct symptom of that kind of inherent loneliness in the creative process. That's what I think. Like we glom onto each other because we don't have that. I just think that's just like a symptom of like modern times in a weird way.
Yeah, but you still have to put yourself out there. Like you still have to kind of like be willing to try to find that sense of community, or try to find at least the beginnings of your tribe. And I think for a lot of people that listen to this podcast, they don't do that. Whether it's like they're too scared to put themselves out there, or they're too scared to ask for something, or they're too scared to ask to collaborate with somebody, or to ask for advice, or it's just like, it is a scary thing to put yourself out there, even online, but it's like so important to kind of say like, hey, I'm here. Hello, world. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you're doing the same thing, really.
Well, I have a question for you, though. So do you find that a lot of people that listen to your podcast are similar to you in certain ways? Like, because you're asking the questions, right? So when people, it's like that gravitational thing, right? So the questions that you answer, you're trying to answer for yourself, but at the same time, you're kind of answering those questions for other people as well. So do you find that when people reach out to you, that there's a similarity between you and them?
For the most part, yeah. And I think that's kind of what the whole, when people are afraid to put themselves out there, put their art out there, they're afraid to get rejected, or they're afraid to get bad comments or dislikes or like hate for their work. But that's so rare. Like that so rarely happens. If somebody doesn't latch on to your message, like what you're trying to put out there into the world, then they're just going to move on. Like they're just going to like say, okay, that was nice. I saw this and I'm just moving on with my life. The people that resonate with you are the ones that stick onto you like you're like a ball of glue, you know what I mean? And it's just like the more and more you put yourself out there, and the more and more people that latch on and are like, hey, I feel this way too, or hey, I have those same questions, or hey, I struggle with these same kind of creative resistances, these blocks. The more that you can build that, like the greater that ball becomes, and it's suddenly becomes this like huge community, this huge tribe. But yeah, like I guess, yeah.
Hey, I have a kind of a left field question for you.
Yes.
It's something I was curious about. When I know it's really important for you to build this community, and you're 3 hours ahead of us right now, so it's not early for you over there. And you work full-time job, and you put out so many podcasts, and you edit all of them. How do you find the time to do it? How do you even find the time to write? Like, you are so much more prolific than most people. It's like amazing.
Right. Well, yeah, I struggle with that a lot.
Doesn't seem
it's
it.
certainly. Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when I first started the podcast, it was 5 episodes a week. I don't know how I did that, and that's how the numbers got up. But now it's down to 2. And yeah, it's just like a matter of like kind of hitting the ground running, figuring out like how fast you can go, and then just kind of slowing down the pace until you figure out kind of a comfortable pace. Now, 2 episodes a week this has become like kind of my creative passion, and I don't have too much time for writing. And I'm actually going to be, well, I might as well say it now, I'm going to be writing a book for the podcast, but I'm going to slow down the podcast episodes when I do that, because I'm realizing that like I'm missing all these things that I'm asking for. I'm like chopping at the bit or whatever, like to get to writing, to like I said before, like I don't know how I feel about the world until I write about it. So the podcast has taken a lot of that creative time from me. So I'm realizing for myself that I need to get back and like kind of take my own advice and really get to my own creative passion, so that I can like become more of a human being, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah. And I like for tonight, like I left work early because I needed to catch up on stuff, and that's kind of like the sacrifices you make. So it's just kind of figuring it out, you know?
Do you feel like you've learned a lot from doing this podcast? Like getting all these different perspectives from people in like a similar mindset and field as you, to that you can help, that would help write the book for you, or help you write the book?
Yeah, it's like written in my head already. Like I know like all these themes keep coming up, and that's why it's like inspiring. And I don't consider myself an expert in any of this, but like you hear it so often from so many people, not only in different like creative fields, but like way on different sides of the timeline, like people that are just starting out, people that haven't even started out. Like some of my guests, like one of my guests just like recently like quit his job and is going full time now. Like, so like you have people at the start, and then you have people at the end, like not the end, but like, 30 years into their career, and everybody kind of still struggles with the same things, or, things come up. You realize that the creative life is like a cyclical thing. Like it's easy some days, it's hard some days, it's easy some years, it's hard some years. And it's just like really inspiring to hear that, like to hear that everybody goes through the same things. And that's why I always encourage people to like you guys are doing, like to try to find a tribe so you can like talk these things through and realize that like you're not in it alone, and like everybody is going through these same kind of doubts and uncertainties that you have, this lack of time, and they just find a way to do it anyway.
Yeah. That's what I found out about the podcast too, or about people that I interviewed with the podcast, is that, no matter where you are in your career, if you're in the beginning of your career, if you're at the middle of your career, or towards the end of your career, a lot of people have these same insecurities, and they're kind of unavoidable. It's those ebbs and flows, and you just kind of have to realize that comes with the territory, and that's just a part of life. And the more that you can understand that and be comfortable with that, but at the same time, within that comfortability, challenge yourself and have, and evolve with the process, I feel like the more healthy that is, but also the more enjoyable that is, I think.
Yeah, well said. And I think something that came up with both of you guys is this whole thing about trying to turn your creative passion into a way to make money, I guess, because that's like the way to, everybody needs to make money somehow. And it's like trying to find that balance of being able to do something you love, but having it not feel like it's like doing somebody else's passion. And it's like that's the hardest thing, that the answer that I still try to get, aside from like balancing time and like trying to find enough time in the day. Those are like the two main things, like trying to find time and then trying to find a way to have this thing be a part of your life where you can make money, but also not sell out.
Well, I think, I mean, speaking about that, I think that there's this sort of like creative honesty. It's like this honesty that you have to have with yourself, and this strategic understanding of how you can get to certain places in life. So it's like if you can put your life on a timeline, like you say, like 5 years or something. And granted, it doesn't have to be that calculated, but it has to. You have to have somewhat of an understanding of where you want to go. For instance, with the podcast in the beginning, with Artist Decoded, I really had this understanding of like, okay, I like collaborating with people. I like listening to people. I want to be empathetic towards people, but at the same time, understanding their creativity, I can understand myself even further, so I can dissect certain things that people say and then internalize that and turn that into my own process as well. But going back to like, the timeline, I knew that in some way that I wanted to contribute to the arts, and I want to help the art movement get pushed even further, and whatever that means, but I knew that I feel like I had something greater with me, a greater contribution than just my own images. But what do you think, Justin? Did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just like it all just comes down to like the old Joseph Campbell, like follow your bliss thing. Like there's something that happens when you're pushing towards what you feel you are meant to be doing, with as much energy and passion as you can. Things will just start happening. And when you're fighting yourself while doing this other thing, that's really apparent too. You'll be less healthy. You'll be, like I said, dissatisfied. And then, then if you follow the same thing, you will attract the right kind of people, because if you put yourself out there and do the thing you want to do, then you're attracting the people who are interested in the thing that you are interested in. So it's just kind of a natural thing. And as you start doing these more things, you will find your demographic, or whatever you want to say, your tribe, whatever. You will find the people that resonate in the same way you do. And you won't resent them for liking what you do. Like when I was an illustrator, I would do this thing and people would say, "Oh, that looks great, man." I was like, "Yeah, man, but it's an armadillo holding a beer bottle. That's bullshit. That's absolute bullshit." I kind of like, you shouldn't like this.
Yeah. but damn, is that a good looking armadillo?
Yeah. I mean, it was painted beautifully. But it's like, the people will approach you. Like you'll be approached by the right kind of people who are interested in the same thing you're interested in. And then things just happen naturally. I just found it to be really natural. I don't think that I attempted to do anything but make myself happier, and then thusly finding this bigger thing, and that became the new thing.
Yeah, I mean, well, okay. So I think there's it's part of
Are you amending
that.
it?
No. I think that no. I'm not amending what I'm saying. I'm adding to what you're saying. So like, I think that's part of it. But at the same time, I think you like, because I think of myself as relatively strategic, but I feel like you're even more strategic. So I feel like,
for sure,
right?
Yeah.
So I feel like you I don't know. I felt like you would have thought about those things in terms of like, I mean, yes, it's an organic process, but I mean, there was a reason why you created Low Collective.
Well, yeah, it was because of dissatisfaction in the art. Okay, so it was natural, but it does come from dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction comes from something. It comes from giving your resources to other people. Okay, so then that raises a different question. How do you get out of that trap? The way out of that trap is to find different leverage points or pressure points in the industry, so that you can get out and use the skill that you've forged in there to do this other thing. Okay, so the best way to do that is getting other people to essentially become one entity to expand your skill set as an entity. And then once you have that, then you can have more leverage. And then once you have more leverage, you can do bigger things. So it is strategic, but it's also natural. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
no, I think it's an evolutionary approach. I think, when I was thinking about just business in general, I knew this very early on, like when I was starting photography, even though it was like the most basic approach, but I knew that, or I had a inkling of a feeling of knowing that I wanted to do, something greater. And, I'm not even like midway into my career, but I feel like, you have to constantly learn and constantly understand. And, Justin listens to way more podcasts than I do. Actually, I box, and this guy, this guy knows like 10 times more about boxing. Like, I physically box, and he knows 10 times more about boxing than I do. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that you have to constantly learn and constantly like dissect information, internalize that, and figure out ways, even from a business standpoint. I'll listen to like guys like Mark Cuban or Tim Ferriss or Tony Robbins, and, people outside of, I guess, that direct art world, and then take those ideas and try to implement that into what we're trying to do. I mean, that's just that's just the way to better yourself, but it's also a way to understand, like, I don't know, I guess just dissect the world and understand what you want to get out of it.
Right. I think sometimes though, like I asked that question of you guys, like, because it's the thing that I still can't figure out is how to make it a way to make money, like to make it so that you can have that be your job without like hating your job. But I think the even more important thing is to like do the thing anyway, to like just do the thing to make yourself happy, to like make yourself into a more complete human being, and to like put that piece of you out into the world. I think that's way more important than figuring a way to like balance money and time and all that. Like that kind of comes secondary. That's like leveling up to the second level. But I think it's so important to have that baseline where you're just doing the thing,
For sure. And like I think we had in the first interviews, like there's certain people born with the compulsion to create, and there's certain people who don't have that. So I think that, yeah, that's always the first step. You do something because you develop a skill because you love to do it, and then from there things get more complicated. And at least for me, like it's easy to come up with all these philosophies, but when it comes down to it, I'm just purely speaking for myself, just figuring it out as I go. So you just constantly need to adapt everything you're doing in your process to figure out how to do that thing to fulfill that compulsion. So this is the newest strategy. So we'll see if it works. It's the latest strategy.
What version is it? 3.12?
I'd say like 3000.2. It's like there's been a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
But I think that's also a valid point too, and like a really important point is to be willing to deviate from the plan, to like, even if it doesn't feel like it's an upgrade to like version 2 or version 3, to be able to like kind of not necessarily abandon the old plan, but if it's not working for you, to like not continue over and over again. That will just drive you crazy and make you hate that thing even more. Like if you find yourself dissatisfied with everything you're doing, or like you said, like, drawing the perfect armadillo holding a beer and then hating people for liking it, that is a great sign that you are on the wrong path. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's funny. I like a better way you said it.
Okay.
No, I mean, I think it's very important to be adaptable. And there's this theme that I saw with Artist Decoded, and it was about talking about caricatures, like becoming a caricature of yourself. It's like something that you did in the past that was successful at that moment, and then you keep on doing it and keep on doing it and keep on doing it. But you do it the same, and you're not really like discovering certain new nuances about yourself throughout the process. So yeah, I mean, I think like that adaptability factor is like of the utmost importance. And yeah, and not being afraid to fail too is a part of that.
I love that analogy, the caricature. And we have, my wife and I have one hanging it was like my wedding present to her, like a caricature of us. And like I'm holding a telescope because I'm into space, and she's like running across a finish line because she likes to run. And it's interesting because on this podcast, we talk about defining yourself as something. And so many people define themselves by like what society tells them that they should be. Like you said in your kind of intro, like talking about, yeah, well, you go to middle school, then high school, then college, and then you're supposed to get a job. And then it's just like going down that path. But like, if you can kind of create a caricature for yourself that's like what you want to be, it's like really scary to do that, to like put yourself out there and be like, I want to be a podcaster and I've never like spoken into a microphone before. I want to be an artist and I haven't picked up a paintbrush for like 20 years, but like I want that caricature of me to be me, like for my 5-year plan. It's like really scary to do that, to draw yourself as that caricature, but like it's really powerful because like we were talking about before, that's when you start defining yourself by that, when you start drawing yourself as that caricature, that's when other people can start to see you as that thing. And that's when like the universe like sends out its troops to help you, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
I agree.
So before we let you go, what's next for No Wave?
Well, we're going to be reopening up at the first part of the year. We've been going through renovations and kind of figuring out the next strategy, next phase. So in December, we're going to be back in our gallery, and first of the year, we're going to start doing big shows there, as well as like popping up all over the place, just kind of spreading out. And we've got our new roster of artists together. We're really happy with, and we're just going to try to do new and innovative things, and hopefully the community will respond to it and come out and enjoy themselves.
Very cool. And that's, if people want to find that, it's nowave.co. Is that right?
Yes, nowave.co. NOHWAVE. Yeah.
NOH. Cool. We'll have everything we talked about, of course, linked up at today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com. We'll say NoWave /NoWave, NOHWAVE. Guys, I have to ask you for the final push, though, because that's the way we end every interview here. And that's where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today. Just give them your best words of advice and really push them to pursue their creative passions. Justin, you go first.
Oh, okay. Shoot. Man, I liked my first one I did. I wish we could just
say the first one.
I think the first one was I'll change it up. I'll change it up.
Let's say that again too. Be a well-rounded, observant, curious, and empathetic person is like one of my favorite quotes.
Well, that's still my main philosophy.
That version is still applies.
It still applies. I mean, I think that's the best possible advice anybody could give. I've gotten that advice from people. Just be empathetic on your journey to wherever you're going. Help as many people as you can. And do what you have to do. That's it.
Cool. Yoshino, you get the final word.
Yeah, I like that visual that you put together about reaching out into your computer or into the microphone and grabbing the person on the shoulder. It kind of reminded me of like Videodrome or something.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I asked in my first interview, and I just never stopped.
No, I get that. I mean, I have a similar thing with my podcast, but I like the visual that gets put into your head when you say those things, or when you said that.
Yeah.
But in terms of advice, the best thing that comes to mind at this particular moment is to trust yourself, as generic as that sounds, but to really be honest with yourself and examine why you're doing certain things, and to be able to trust yourself through that approach and not second guess yourself, and be able to adapt as you go on and evolve with the process. Because you have to trust your process, and you have to have faith that you're making the right decision, at least the right decision that you can at that particular moment, because up until that point, you've been given all this information that you've learned throughout your entire life. And you only know as much as you know right then and there. So you have to trust yourself. You have no other choice. And yeah, that's probably the best advice I can give right now.
Perfect, man. Guys, thank you so much for coming on the show and for giving us all that push and telling us about No Wave, and just it's been a great conversation. I love to do this again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having us on.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Oh, of course. Tell us where we can find you.
You can find me, Yoshino, on Instagram at Yoshino Studios, or you can go to my website, yoshinostudios.com. You can find Artist Decoded at Artist Decoded, and the same artistdecoded.com.
Yeah, and you can find me at Instagram at RareBitUltra. You can find No Wave at No Wave. And then if you're in the LA area and you want to see some of the events that are happening, you can go to nowave.co, nohwave.co. We constantly update all the events, and if you want to come out, that's the place to find out what's going on.
Very cool. We'll have all that linked up again at today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/nowave. Yoshino, Justin, thanks again, guys.
I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man.
Big thank you to those guys once again for coming on the show and telling us about the No Wave Collective. If you're in the area, definitely go and check it out. The next time I head to the West Coast, I am going to definitely stop by. Those guys also asked me some questions about myself, my own creative process, and this podcast. And if you didn't hear the announcement a couple episodes ago, I mentioned that Your Creative Push will be dropping down to one episode a week for a couple months while I get back to my creative passions of writing, getting my chops back, in anticipation for writing the Your Creative Push book, which I'm going to attempt to do in January. Just January, I'm going to write that book. So this is the official start of the slower pace, just this episode this week, and we'll be back in 1 week's time on Monday with our next episode. But in this kind of downtime that we're going to be having, I want you to start to think about January. I want you to start thinking about not just your creative New Year's resolutions, but what big project that you want to take on, some kind of giant task that you've been pushing off that you know that you have to do at some point in your life, and maybe it is kind of providing you with a roadblock, something that you can't do all your other creative goals until you do this one thing. For me, that's the book. And if you remember last year, I had that push to do your entire New Year's resolution in January. So in the next couple months, start thinking about what big project you want to take on to join us all as we all take on our own big, giant tasks and try to complete it in 1 month's time to give ourselves that turbo boost in our creative career. And as always, if you run out of episodes to listen to, head to yourcreativepush.com. At the top, you'll see episodes listed, and you can go by category, by date, all different kinds of ways to find episodes that might pique your interest if you need a little extra push. And if you need help finding a specific episode for a specific art form or a specific resistance, just email me, youngman@yourcreativepush.com. I'll send you some suggestions for episodes that I think will help you out specifically. On our next episode, we have Megan Carty. Megan is a talented artist who comes on the show to talk about not just her creative career, her ebbs and flows, the struggles and the triumphs, but also dealing with depression and the many things that she has come to realize about her creative process, that it was something that was there all along to help her through all of those difficult times. If you want to find out more about Megan or check out her art, you can head to her website at megancartyart.com, or on Instagram, she is Megan_Carty_art. We'll have that all linked up in today's show notes page, as well as a plethora of other resources for you from today's episode at yourcreativepush.com/263. But that is all I've got for you today. Hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done, to go out there and find other like-minded creative people, create your own collective, create your own mastermind group, create your own accountability partnership, and just get out there. I love you all so much. Go get some amazing work done. We will see you next week if you need the push again. Go get it done. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.